asking more of our friends to come to these things. We'll get started with the prayer. Steve Porter will give that, and then we'll go from there.
Our Heavenly Father, as we come before Thee this night, we're thankful as members of this state of Idaho. And pray, Father, that we'll have Thy Spirit to be with us tonight. That as we listen to Brother Ammon Bundy, that we'll be inspired to do the things that we should do. We're thankful, Father, for this wonderful land that we live in, this land that is choice above all other lands. We thank Thee, Father, for its preservation for us, and for the opportunity we have to live here and the freedom that we have. We're thankful, Father, for Thy gospel that Thou hast spread among us and among this people and this world. And we're thankful for our Savior, Jesus Christ, and all that He has done for each of us in His wonderful atonement. We pray, Father, that we'll uphold Him and His calling of those men to establish this Constitution, that we'll be able to uphold it and support it and do as Thou would have each of us do. Now we ask Thee, Father, to bless the people of the state of Idaho, that they'll recognize the opportunity they have to elect a righteous man to the governorship of this state. We pray, Father, that Thou would bless Ammon and his family, his personal family and his extended family. And we're thankful for them and for the things that they've done that are things that we can each look to and try to emulate as they stand up for what they know is right. Now, Father, we ask Thee that we might have Thy Spirit with us this night at this meeting, and bless Ammon Bundy and his family, and bless his campaign, that he might go forward and be able to win this election. And we pray for these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. So I've always admired Ammon ever since I heard about what went on in the desert down there where I grew up. And actually I've had the thought a few times of when I've run into an opportunity to stand up for freedom, I've thought to myself, what would Ammon do? So all of you probably know more really about all that than I do, but I got thrown into this conducting spot last minute, and I thought, well, when are we even voting for governor? Because I really don't know what's going on with any of that stuff. I used to be a committeeman, and now I'm not, and I'm not really involved in politics much. So I got online, and the first thing I found was an article that says, anti-government extremist Ammon Bundy joins the wild governor's race in Idaho. I thought, well, cool. So I don't really know much, and I'm glad he's campaigning this early. This seems early to me, and I felt kind of bad that I didn't know too much about it, but I don't feel too bad about it because it is early, and I'm looking forward to hearing what he has to say. So,
Thank you.
that's off.
Can everybody hear me okay? There we go. Can you hear me back there? Thank you for being here. I am starting early, I guess. This thing could cut in and out on me, Bill. All right, I might just have to talk. There we go. We'll use it till we can't. How's that? Yeah, so the elections are in May. The primary elections are in May 2022, of course. And believe it or not, Idaho is pretty much a Republican state. I just looked up the demographics in Franklin County, and I've got this little tool that we've been building. It's going to be very beneficial for our campaign. It's a little easier on a laptop than it is on my phone. But there's about 300 Democrats in the county, and there's about 7,000 Republicans or unaffiliated voters or Constitutional Party or independents. And, you know, majority, of course, is Republican. And so you get an idea, like, you know, just in your county. And then I did a search of the 6 counties surrounding Franklin, and there's actually 66,000 voters that are not Democrats. So it gives you an idea of your demographics here. It's quite a bit. I mean, you have an impact. And let me give you I'll give you a little bit of a statistic, but I'm going to have you guess first. How many people do you think voted for Governor Brad Little in the primary in the 2018 governor's race? In the primary, not the generals. In the primary. Any idea? So remember, you're talking about just this little corner of Idaho, right? And you're talking about 66,000 people, excluding the Democrats. So that's a pretty good base, right? That those are people that should have somewhat of a pretty good idea that's somewhat close to yours in this room, I would say. And hopefully I wouldn't mind if there was a Democrat in here too. We could have a good conversation, right? Any idea of how many people voted for Brad Little in the primaries in the 2018 governor's race?
In this area?
No, the entire state. What he won by.
10,000.
What he won by.
In the primary.
In the primary.
What percentage of registered Republicans vote in the primary? 10%?
I don't know. That's a good question. I actually could find that out
Yeah.
through this little tool we've been building, but I've never looked at that.
Probably a fractional amount.
Something like
Compared to the generals, yes.
The primary is the general.
That's exactly right.
Between Republicans, the Democrats are sitting on the side.
Yeah, so now you're getting ahead of me here. Exactly. But
They've never done that.
you're right, but we're gonna talk a little bit more about that. So any guesses?
So if you win the primary, you got it. You're an ace.
Well, yeah, I mean, Idaho is a Republican state, so whoever wins the primaries in May has always won the governor's office, right? And so the problem is a lot of people sit back and they don't go vote in the primary, and then they think somehow their vote matters, which it does, don't get me wrong, but they think that it matters more than it did when they go to vote in November, because everybody's hyped up about the elections and so forth. So anyhow, I can see here I'm going to have to give you the answer. 73,000 people voted for Brad Little in the primaries. And 68 was for Raul Labrador. It was a very close race, within 5,000 votes. So you can see that how much of an impact this little corner of Idaho could have. It could completely change who's going to be the governor of Idaho, just by simply getting active and voting in the primaries. And those are just raw numbers. 73,000 something, is what he won by. And so, don't underestimate the political power you have in this little corner of the state. It is tremendous. And if we could rally the people, if each person here goes out and tells 10 people and we get them active, and those people go and get 10 more, and as things get closer, and if they were informed about needing to participate in the primaries rather than only participating in the generals, then this little corner of the state could completely control who's going to be the governor. They really could. And anyway, so I offer that to you. Any thoughts about that? Any comments? you kind of,
Idaho has close primaries,
yeah, close primary, thank you.
so if you're not a
See,
registered.
you guys are making my job really easy.
Yeah, if you're not a registered Republican, then this discussion's irrelevant.
So correct, so I think it was 2008, the Republican Party changed the rules. And they made it so it was a closed primary, so you cannot go vote in the Republican primaries unless you're Republican. Which kind of makes sense, right? It really does make sense. But before you could. So what we see now is we see the Democrats registering as Republican, and they're going over there trying to influence and vote. They'll vote for this. We already see it. They're already colluding the Republican rhinos, which is Republican in name only. That would be those that have been in power here for quite a while. They're working with the Democrat Party to get the Democrats to come over during the primaries and vote for Brad Little and Scott Bedke. And that's a known thing. And now they're saying, well, we need to do it because Ammon Bundy is right-wing, far, and he's going to destroy Idaho. And that's pretty much what their narrative is. And I think we'll turn that narrative around and inform the Democrats that this is what we'll say. Don't tell anybody. Don't tell the Democrats. Don't tell any of Democrats' friends. This is what we'll say. We'll send the message out to the Democrats that they need to come and register Republican and vote for Ammon because he'll be really easy to beat in the generals, right? And then we'll beat him in the generals. No, but anyway, that's kind of the games that are going on. And I just wanted you to see and understand the influence that you can have in this state. And also understand that the political climate that is going on in Idaho is different than it's been in a very, very long time, maybe never. Because people did not appreciate their governor locking them down in their homes or trying to lock them down in their homes. They didn't appreciate their governor saying that people can't go to church or that their businesses have to be closed or they can't travel. Idaho was the first state in the union to arrest somebody for going to church outside. And we also were the first state to arrest a mother for taking her kids to the park. And I can't go on and on and on. Myself, I was arrested 6 times in 2022, and I think it rolled over into 2021. I can't remember, it was so many times. And simply for being peaceful and just exercising and standing up for my rights. And really, I wasn't doing it for myself. I could go home and enjoy my family. I could start a business again. I could do the things that I've done in the past and been successful at and never ever enter politics, and it would never hurt my feelings one bit. But when I see a pattern of things happening where we have officials of a government saying that we can't worship when, where, and how we may, I see a problem with that. And when I have the ability to make an impact on that, I feel like I have a duty to stand up and do something about it. And unfortunately, when you do that, a target is put on your back, and then a lot of other things happen, and you end up in Ada County Jail. So anyway, that's kind of a little bit how I'll start here today. I hope to have a conversation, though. I hope for us to be able to talk, get comfortable with each other before we end here. I do want you to know a little bit about me, if you don't already. I grew up on a ranch in southern Nevada, very dry, desert, arid ranch. Just kind of give you a little perspective, it takes 100 acres to produce enough feed for one cow. And my dad runs 600 to 700 head of cattle, so it's over a huge area. And my family was sent down there from Brigham Young in 1877. We followed some people down there that were there a few years earlier than us, and they came back and told Brigham Young that it was uninhabitable. There was no way that people could live down there. And so I always tease, I say this almost every meeting, so it's probably getting boring to Wendy, but I just say, So Brigham Young, he went and he says, well, this group says that it's uninhabitable, and but we need to go develop that area. We need to settle that area. So he went and found the most stubborn, obstinate, hard-headed people they could find, and he sent them down there. And that was my family. And we've been there ever since. We developed the farmland there and diverted the water out of the Virgin River. And also we went up onto the mountains, foothills of the mountains, and found springs. And they captured those springs, put them into water troughs, and began to pipe that water all through the desert. So we have water troughs all through the desert where water, the closest water would be 10 to 12 miles. And that's how the cattle can go out there and benefit from all of that desert and still survive. And that's who I am. That's how I grew up. I grew up on that desert over a huge area, traveling, riding horses, checking on waters, gathering cattle. That was how I grew up. And I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it so much that I didn't want to leave. But my dad told me that the ranch wasn't big enough for the both of us. And he didn't mean that in a bad way, although we butted heads from time to time. But he meant that the ranch just wasn't big enough to produce enough of an income for more than one or two families. And I was one of many kids, and I'm in the middle. And ultimately, he was just telling me, he was just warning me and directing me that at some point I'm going to have to leave the ranch, and I'm going to have to go find a living somewhere else. And so I did. I went first, left home, and I went on a mission. I served in Minnesota. Came home and went to Southern Utah University for a little bit. And I started a business, a fleet maintenance business. And then waited for my wife there, kept wondering when she was going to show up. And she finally did, and I married her. We moved to Arizona, and I still had my business, but I moved my business to Arizona. And started our life there and ended up running a fleet maintenance business in Arizona for 21 years. And it ended up being one of the largest private fleet maintenance companies in Arizona. And I have hired hundreds of people. Our budget, we dealt with millions of dollars a year in budgets. And again, I tell you this, why? Because I'm here to try to gain your confidence that I've had the experience of running business, that I've had the ability to work with a lot of people and direct a lot of people in a way in which we could accomplish something together. And I've managed budgets and so forth. Millions of dollars a year. Anyway, about year 17, 18 of my business, the entire time had been looking for a good software to help me run my business. Because there was only like pieces. There was some financial softwares, and then there was some tracking of maintenance softwares, and then there was some work order softwares and so forth. And I had this business, and I was running it with paper or all these different softwares, trying to piece them together. And I had a good process that was working, so I ended up deciding that I would make my own software. Because that's the nice thing I always say it's a nice thing about living in the United States, right? If you can't get a job, what do?
Start business.
You make a job. You make your own job, right? We live in the United States of America, where we're still free enough to do that. And that's a great blessing. If you can't get a job, or if you don't want to work where you're working now, or whatever the circumstance is, then you have the opportunity to start your own job. Well, that's the way I looked at it with the software. I couldn't find what I wanted, and so I had the ability and the resources. I put a team together, and it took us 3.5 years, and we built a software. We tested it on. We used my customers as guinea pigs, my vendors and my employees, technicians, office staff. They were all guinea pigs, and we developed this really awesome fleet maintenance shop management software. And then, it made a huge difference in our shop. And we just became, that much more impactful on the industry, and especially the Phoenix, Arizona area and all of Arizona. And then I began to sell that software to other shops across the country. And now it's one of the #1 fleet maintenance shop management softwares in North America. And since then, I've sold both those businesses. I sold my fleet maintenance business, and I sold my software. And in between all of that, about 7 years ago, I moved to Idaho, and now I'm raising because I just couldn't stand being in the city. The city come and grew up around us. We were kind of way out on the outskirts, and then it grew up around us. And so I now live in Emmett, Idaho. My wife's name is Lisa, and she is a very wonderful woman and a true companion and helpmate to me. I have 6 children, 3 boys, 3 girls. My oldest just got married. She's 19 and now lives in Moscow, Idaho, and her and her husband are going to school up there. And my youngest is 6 years old. And so that's kind of my background. That's who I am. And I just want you to understand who I am. So I have a question for you, and then let's have a conversation. What is freedom? What is freedom? It's not the same as liberty, but it's close. But can you give me a definition of freedom? Maybe it's not a trick question, but maybe you haven't actually tried to define it before. So anybody want to give it a shot? Right back here and then right here.
The ability to make decisions without being impeded by someone else or another entity.
I think that's a pretty good answer. The ability to make the decision by yourself without being impeded by somebody else. I think that's a pretty fair answer. What do you got here?
It's pretty much the same, because I see liberty as, I believe everybody has liberty because that's your conscience and what you decide and what you can do with your choice. But freedom involves the things in the physical world being impeded, like you said. If you don't have freedom, you're being impeded by something physically or even mentally. Drugs can cause people to lose their freedom because they can't have conscious thoughts that help them make correct choices.
Okay, those are great answers. I'm going to give you a similar answer, one that has helped me to define liberty, and that is to be able to do anything you want as long as you do not infringe upon another person's rights, right? Now, so think about it. Let's apply this to religious freedom, right? What would be religious freedom? To worship anything you want, as long as you do not use that to infringe upon somebody else's rights, right? As long as that. And what about freedom to trade with each other? It's to be able to trade whatever you want, as long as that doesn't infringe upon somebody else's right. Freedom to travel, freedom to, what other freedoms? We've got a lot of freedoms, at least we should, right?
Speech, religion.
Freedom of speech, thank you. Religion, yeah.
There's all kinds out there.
Again, to be able to speak whatever you want to speak, as long as it does not infringe or hurt somebody else's rights, right? And that's what it is. And it's the same thing that you both were explaining here, right here.
It's a political right.
It is a political right. It's not only a political right, because where does that right come from? Where is the right to worship, the right to speak, the right to trade with each other, the right to travel?
Natural born. It's your natural born.
They're natural born. They come from God, right? Why can God give them to us?
Free agency is co-eternal with God. Free agency is evidence in freedom. You have the right to choose, but you should choose righteously.
Thank you. That's very true. Absolutely.
I
So-
would think in terms, the 10 Commandments, you don't have to be religious to love your fellow man as yourself. You don't rob, steal, kill, and self-govern. You can govern yourself, like you talked about, not hurting anybody, and just do your business.
Absolutely. And if we
But thinking of others and not hurting others.
Okay, so I'm gonna go back, you're absolutely right, I'm gonna go back to that question though. Why can God give them? Like, go ahead.
God created us.
Because He's our creator, right? He created us. He created the earth. He created the universe. What's that?
The elements are His,
He-
including our bodies.
That's correct. And He has given us our agency. He has given us freedom, right?
I think it goes deeper than that, because even God has a set of principles that He must abide by, and that is of agency,
It certainly,
universal.
it certainly is what He is, right? And so, I think it's very important that we understand, this, I can obviously tell in this room, you've thought more than once about this. This isn't the first time, you've thought about this. But it is something that we need to recognize, that He created this earth, He created us, and He gave us certain rights. And those rights come from Him, and no one else has the authority to take them. Right? No one has the authority to take them. Why? Because they belong to Him, and He gave them to us. There is nobody in between that has authority to take them. And that's what's called an unalienable right, or unalienable right. Okay? You're not supposed to take them. And ultimately, there's some pretty good legal terminology about that He kind of touched on. But ultimately, you will be accountable to God if you try to take these rights. Why? Because He's the one that gave them to us. And they're ours. They're not anybody else's. And so, as we learn in the Declaration of Independence, man has done certain things. And I'm talking about mankind, so I hope we don't have too many politically correct people in here. Mankind.
Person kind.
Yeah, person kind, yeah. Well, no, yeah, well, I guess that's gender, right?
Person is.
Whatever. I'm not very politically correct, I can promise you.
Man is correct.
About
Yeah.
It is. So, but, let's go to the Declaration of Independence. Who remembers, I love reading the Declaration of Independence. I'm gonna just go to it here. So we've talked about that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So that's not all of them, right? He said among them. Yeah. Among them. Yeah, that's right. Among them are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And those who have studied the pursuit of happiness know that the founders understood that it was the control and ownership of property that was this pursuit of happiness, that you can pursue it, right? It wasn't all of it. That wasn't all of it. But that in order for people to pursue happiness, they had to have a place to live. They had to be able to own and control property. And I agree with them 100%. I agree with them. If you don't have a place that you can go and be comfortable on this earth to live your life and to live it free, if you don't have a place, then what does life and liberty mean? It means nothing. Nothing at all. All you're doing is driven around like an animal in the woods by a predator who wants to take you down all the time. It's not a very great pursuit of happiness. So anyhow, let's go back to this. So that we're created equally, we're endowed by our Creator with unalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. What does that mean?
It means our government's become our enemy now.
Well, now you're jumping way ahead.
It means that we pre-exist government.
That's correct. That because of these rights that God gave us, there was a need to defend them. And we decided to unite together and create a government, which is really just unity of people, you know.
Right here, start right here from the ground.
Right. And so then it says that governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. So where does the power of government come from? From the people that created the government. Right? It's not the other way around.
That's only in so much that we, the people, have power upon others as well. So in other words, I don't have the right to come to your door and say, hey, I don't like the type of firearm you own, hand it over. If I don't have that power, then nor does the government have that power.
So let's explore that a little bit. So if the legislature of Idaho goes to the Capitol building and they decide that they're going to make guns illegal, do they have that authority?
No.
Well, but they're the legislature and they voted on it and they passed it. So they don't? No, but that is what our mindset, even in Idaho, has become. That the legislature can go and they could create a bill that mandates businesses to do certain things, private businesses to do certain things, or that mandate people to do certain things, right? And we just accept it and say, well, it's the law. But the problem is, it's not. Okay? So, but let's break this down a little bit more. So, because it goes right into. So again, that the governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That when any form of government becomes destructive to these ends, what ends? To the protection of the rights, right? If they become destructive to these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it and institute new governments, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Isn't that beautiful terminology?
That's why they don't want you elected.
Well, yeah.
Well, they don't want that knowledge out. They suppressed it.
Well,
You got
and
people thinking the other way.
that's right.
This, they're in trouble.
We have to overcome the mindset in Idaho that we are obligated to be obedient when they have not upheld their part of the deal. And that is exactly what they do not want people to understand. It's not the other way around. Our rights are not derived from government. They are not. They come from God, and government was instituted by man for the protection of rights and no other. And if they fail to do that, then we have a right to alter or abolish it and to set new government, new guards. Now, we don't want to do that, right? We don't. And in fact, there's a very interesting line in here that I have always enjoyed in the Declaration of Independence. It says, let's see. Mankind are long established, I gotta go back just a little bit more. Let's see. Prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, okay? So we don't want to change it up all the time for no reason. And accordingly, all experience has shown that this is the point that, or the sentence that I really think is interesting, that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. What does that mean? We just put up with it for a long, long time. A lot longer than we should. That we become accustomed to it. Right?
Well, maybe it means that the history of despotism is a lot longer than the history of liberty.
Yeah, I think you're right on that. Well, absolutely. I mean, there's no question in that, right? But that people put up with it. And even when they could right themselves of it, they typically don't. And it allows, basically this, cycle to extend a lot longer than it needs to be. Now, I'm not here coming to tell you that we need to start a rebellion and we need to overtake the government, right? I would be if that was what I felt we would need to do, and as long as we did it righteously, because it's certainly within our rights to do that. But I don't believe that that is what we need to do right now. I think that we have a great opportunity in Idaho, a great opportunity right now in Idaho. The political climate is different than it's been in a long, long time. And we're a small enough state, and we're a conservative state, that we can actually unite together and use the state for the purpose in which it was created for. Actually get the state to start check and balancing the federal government. Get the state to stop allowing the federal government to trickle its money down through the state for obedience. To actually stop when somebody's rights are being infringed upon. The state should stand in between. What was that?
I said our own money
Well, yeah.
that they stole from us.
Or they printed it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, which is a huge problem. And my family experienced something that no family should have to experience. And that was the full force of the federal government coming down on a little family in the middle of the desert. Because my dad said, no, these are our rights. We've been ranching here for 145 years, 5 generations, since 1877. We have deeds with the state of Nevada that show that we have this deeded right. And here comes the federal government saying, well, we're going to take it. My dad says, no, you can't take it. And they say, we're going to take it anyway. And then my dad said, hell no, you're not going to take it. And that's the way he stood. But it's not a fair fight when the federal government comes down upon a little ranching family or any other family. And our founders knew that it wouldn't be a fair fight. And they created a mechanism to balance that power. And what is that mechanism?
Militia.
That's one. But there's one before that. If the one before that fails, what is the mechanism?
Well, you have a right to petition the government. That may not be what
You
you're
can do
asking.
that. They have a right to ignore you too.
Yeah.
But it is right. The mechanism is the state. It is the state. Just as if there's a pedophile, and I hesitate using this example, but it's so effective and it shows the need. If you have a pedophile and you have your child here, are you going to stand back and say, just like they did with my family, the state of Nevada and the county, Clark County sheriff and so forth, just step back and said, well, we're going to take a neutral position. It's not a neutral position when you let the federal government come and attack a little family. And just like saying to a pedophile or a child, well, as a parent, I'm just going to take a neutral position. It's not a neutral position. The duty and the role and the responsibility of a parent is to stand in between that pedophile and that child and defend that child, even at the cost of a life, their own life. And that's the role of a state too. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not saying the state is our parent, but that is a role of the state. It is to stand in between the people and any other force that is coming against them to take away what? The rights that God gave them. Go ahead.
You know, that scenario would have been very useful during Ruby Ridge and Waco, where the federal government came in to take away
That's
rights.
exactly right.
The sheriff stood in.
That's it. That is the design. The design is for the state to step in, and particularly the sheriff. The sheriff has the power to deputize everybody in his county. He could literally deputize the largest army in the state or anywhere around. He has the power to do that. To what? To defend the individual.
Don't the feds cannot operate in this county without the sheriff's permission?
They're not
correct?
supposed to.
Is that correct?
That's right. They're supposed to get consent from the county sheriff before they can enforce law in the county, but they don't. And the reason they don't is from a succession of federal money given to the counties, and the counties signing contracts, signing memorandums of understanding, and they give up. They don't have authority to give it up, but they do in contractual agreements. They basically say, the federal government says, hey, we got $3 million here, we want you to sign this MOU, Memorandum of Understanding. Well, in that MOU, it says basically that the federal law enforcement agencies do not have to get permission from the county to enforce federal law inside the county. And so they sign it, and now they don't do it anymore, along with a whole bunch of other things. Go ahead.
Can you tell me where in the Constitution it gives the federal government authority to have law enforcement in the states?
I'm glad you asked me that question. There is no authority in the Constitution at all for the federal government to enforce any law in the state at all, in the states at all. There is criminal jurisdiction given to to Congress in places like military bases, post offices. Those are enclaves. Those are enclaves, federal enclaves inside the state. But those are a jurisdiction inside the state. And outside those enclaves, they have no policing or arresting power, period. But we have allowed them to do it for so long that now it's become the normal. In fact, not only that, it's gone as far as to think, well, if the federal government, the FBI shows up, that they take control of the whole situation. When in reality, they have no criminal jurisdiction at all. And the sheriff is the only law enforcement officer in the county that has been delegated that authority from the people. And it's understanding these things and these principles and getting them right is going to do a lot of good for us and for the protection of our rights. The states are there to defend our rights. The county is there to defend our rights, particularly the county sheriff. And I don't think I need to tell you that we're going into a season of times where we need these defenses to be functioning and working. We need them to, these people and these agencies and institutions that were set up, we need them to be acting in the purpose in which they were established. We need them to. Otherwise, we become defenseless, and we have to organize ourselves to do it ourselves, which is our right to do. Second Amendment. Who can quote the Second Amendment? Emery, can you quote it? Okay. Does someone have it real quick? Go ahead.
The right to keep or
That's close. The right to keep and bear arms. Okay, so that's the second part of it.
Yeah, the first part is it being necessary to any free state.
He's really close.
Yeah, I can't remember. There's some.
A well-regulated militia being necessary for the security of a free state.
Yes, sir.
The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. What does it say? In order for people to be free, in order for the state to be free, people have to be armed. And regulated means they are regularly preparing. They're equipped. That's what it means. And it says, the founder said that it's necessary for a people to be free. In order, they have to be armed and prepared. Why would they say such a thing?
Tyrants.
They knew that the systems of government were going to break down. They knew that the people were going to have to defend their rights because these institutions that were set up to do it would break down. They understood that.
They lived it.
They lived it. That's exactly right. They lived it. And so they knew that. In fact, there's an interesting thing about I got to stop talking and start letting you ask questions. So I'll do that here in just a sec. The Federalist and Anti-Federalist papers, let's say the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists was kind of the two groups that were battling when it come to the Constitution. The Federalists wanted the Constitution, the Anti-Federalists didn't. They ultimately came together and they were able to ratify the Constitution in most of the states. And it was under one understanding. And it was that they both agreed that if the federal government was established, and if it got oppressive, that the militias, meaning the people, would never allow them to overstep the constitutional bounds, that the militias would. And so they said, okay, let's go ahead and give this central government, let's ratify the Constitution, because the people will always be armed and they'll always stop the federal government. Okay, now that hasn't happened, although, you know, it's been a couple hundred years now and we've done fairly well, but we're at the point now where we literally have a central government, state government, and it's primarily in the agencies, the executive agencies that are coming down and threatening people's liberty. Right here, and then we'll go into questions.
You know, one of the biggest numbers that the people have on the Second Amendment is that somewhere, somehow in there's an exception clause that says that people have the right to these arms except for short-barreled rifles.
Yeah.
And it's this thing that they have to have sporting value. And that's the biggest farce there is, because the Second Amendment was there to guarantee that our inherent rights are that we have the same weaponry as our police and military have.
Yeah.
Plain and simple.
Yeah. Well, and we have to evaluate our own selves, because a lot of people say, well, we really want to check to make sure there's no criminals that get guns, right? We want to check. So, you know, we like that we have to do background checks. And, you know, we don't want this and this and this person. We want, you know, we justify it. And we give authority to the people that will actually destroy our liberties by justifying it somehow. And a lot of times it's done by the excuse of crime. And the reality is it's a shall not infringe. It's an order to the government. You shall not infringe anybody bearing arms. And it's just that simple. Okay, let's go to questions here.
Okay, question on that same subject. If we're going to bear arms and have, be able to protect ourselves from government, what are those arms and what should they be to protect us from the kind of government that we have today?
Yeah, I think
That's what he was talking about.
Yeah, he alluded to that. It's very clear that the founders believed that we should be equipped as well as the government is equipped. That there should not be any restrictions on those. And I mean, that's as established as really anything. I know.
We're the creator of them, right?
Yeah.
So can the servant
Well,
do more than us?
Well, and you know, it's interesting that, you know, it'd be the government that's restricting the access to them. You know, if you want a good example of those giving up their arms, though, and being oppressed, let's look at Australia right now. I mean, what's happening in Australia is unbelievable. They've been in lockdown now for over a year, national lockdown, where they can come out an hour a day. Depend on if it's 1 o'clock and your last name starts with T, then you can come out. One person of the household can come out for an hour to get the things you need. That's been going on now for over a year. And those people willingly give up their arms many, many years ago because they fell to the con that somehow they were more safe without them. And now they have nothing, they can't do anything. They'll go out into the streets and the government brings out their weapons and their MRAMs and there's nothing they can do to defend themselves. That's just one example right now. Canada's not much different, a little bit better, but not much. So, questions, right here.
Do you have any thoughts on what's going to happen in either here in southeast Idaho or in Idaho at large with the new BLM head who was recently approved? Have you
Yeah.
thought about that at all?
So she's an extreme environmentalist. She's what they call an eco-terrorist, environmental terrorist. And I mean that because, you know, she's been involved in spiking trees, doing all that crazy, extreme environmentalist stuff, and now she's the head of one of the largest land agencies in the United States. Well, the largest land agency in the United States.
went over the Colorado River, I couldn't see the water.
Well,
I mean, they're gonna starve out Arizona and LA and.
they're gonna send the water right out into the ocean when people need it. Well, I'm gonna go a little deeper. I'm gonna answer your question, but I'm gonna go a little deeper because I realize that it seems like, we're all kind of the same cloth here. And somehow we gotta get out and we gotta get people coming in that aren't. We gotta have these meetings and get them here and we'll do that. My campaign, we'll be back, but I'm gonna express to you some of the the reality of people like the person who is head of the Bureau of Land Management. I can't remember her name right now, but because what do we believe? Again, we talked about it. We believe that there's a God. He's our Heavenly Father. We believe He created the earth and He placed us on here, that we were created in His image. And we were taught in our scriptures that He gave us dominion over the earth. He gave man dominion over the earth to multiply and to replenish the earth, to till it, to cultivate it, and to subdue it, right? He gave it to us for our benefit. We're taught that the plants and the animals are there for the benefit of man. And that's what we believe. That is our Christian belief. That is the Judeo-Christian belief of all Christian churches or anybody who truly believes in the Bible. But there is another religion out there that's become very, very powerful, that have infiltrated the seats of almost every government in the world, and certainly the United States government. And they believe something totally different. They believe that there is no God, that the earth wasn't created, that it evolved, that man was not created, that he and she evolved, that they're only another species, okay? And that mankind has evolved intellectually faster than all the other species. So therefore, we have a huge advantage over the other species. And we become invasive. This is their belief. And therefore, it is their religion, their moral duty to balance the species by creating a disadvantages for the human race. That is what they believe for mankind. And so that is why they want to take out the dams. That's why they want to stop you from using and harvesting the forest and farming and ranching. They do not want you to use the land and the natural resources because they look at it as an advantage to mankind and a disadvantage to the other species. And until you understand that it is a religion, you can't understand why someone would want to take the dams out of the Snake River. But what are they trying to do? They're trying to create a disadvantage for mankind to balance the species. That's exactly why would we want our forests to burn up rather than use them? Why would grazing be a bad thing? Unless you look at it through their eyes. They're a direct enemy to those who believe in God and believe in Christ and believe in the Bible. They're a direct enemy. And so understanding that right here and then right here.
And with no concept or belief in God, then you don't need to follow what He did. The Constitution then becomes an archaic historical document of interest, but not applicable.
Or something to directly go against because it was founded upon the belief of God, right? Right here.
I've read your bio and I've read your political statements and really enjoyed it. How do you see, talking about all this, how do you see yourself starting to butt that and to, do the things you said that you wanted to do?
So again, thank you, Wendy. Wendy's my campaign manager. She's been just tremendous, awesome. So thank you very much, Wendy. We'll give her a hand later on. So, you know, I guess politically, before running for governor, I have come to the defense of multiple people, including my dad. That wasn't I didn't have a dog in that fight, other than I grew up there and had a love, but I had left the ranch 20 years prior to that, and I was going there to help my father as a son that was honoring his father. And my other brothers were doing the same thing. And we went there and we put ourselves in that situation to help my father defend his ranch. And when I first came there, I wondered if it was worth it. I wondered if it was worth it for just to be able to run some cows on the desert. But when I saw what happened, what was going on there, it was like a scene out of the Hollywood movie Red Dawn. That's what it was like at the ranch. The helicopters and M-ramps and guards and just all of that going on. They built a military base, and you know, they were killing the cattle from the air, and they were digging large, big holes in the desert and dumping them in it, and leaving the baby calves out in the desert to die. And then they began to destroy our water infrastructure with the backhoes and dump trucks and all of that. And that's what was going on. And it became something way more than just cows in the desert. It became something that meant something even more than just the ranch, which meant a lot to me. But it meant something that even my posterity would be affected if we didn't stand up against this stuff.
This is despotism.
Yes, absolutely. And so it became that way. And well, I'm going to tell you I'm going to emphasize on this, because that Monday when I came in from Arizona, and I had equipment and so forth, I came down the Mormon Mesa, if you've ever been there, down into the valley, Virgin Valley, dropped down towards where my dad's ranch is, and on the way down, it's just this slope. It's just a long slope that drops all the way to the Virgin River. And it's a desert, so you can see a long, long ways. And I could see all of this going on. I could see the guards, and I could see the helicopters, and I could see, you know, the equipment and the patrol places and so forth. And I had heard what was going on before that, and I could not believe what I was seeing. I couldn't believe it. And when I finally got to where kind of everybody was assembling there, I had a camp trailer, or it was a toy hauler, and I opened the back and had these bunk beds. You know, if you've seen them, the bunk beds drop down. But I had equipment, I had the four-wheelers and stuff, and I was so tired. I just pulled it down as much as I could, and I climbed up in there. And I could see, it was dark now, and I could see still helicopters, and you could see these posts where the guards were, and there was miles and miles of this. And I began to pray, because I didn't know what else to do. It just kind of tore a hole in me. It's hard to explain how I was feeling, because it was always such a free place for me. And it was always such that land to me was all about freedom. And me being able to be free, and my family and anybody out there being free, and more free than almost any place in the world. It really was that way. And now you couldn't step off the paved road, or you would be beaten or killed. And so I'm praying, and at that time it was the longest prayer I've ever said. I prayed well into the night. I prayed several hours, and I was asking, what is going to happen here? Like, what is the Lord going to do here? Like, we just can't be okay with this, and we're not big enough to do anything about it. So how's the Lord going to, what's his plan? Because I always had faith that the Lord would intervene at the right times, and our scriptures and everything, that our life and our faith is based upon that. And early in the morning, I began to get answers. And one, I was given an answer, or understanding that my family was going to be protected. And that was a great blessing. Because at that time, it was just pretty much my family standing. And second was that there was going to be a lot of people that were going to come, and that we needed to prepare for them. And I found that interesting because that the day before, or the morning of Monday morning, my father went with a horse trailer to Las Vegas and loaded it full of pallets of bottled water, because he was feeling the exact same thing, and that we hadn't talked. And then third, the Lord helped me understand that He was going to show us a pattern of what we needed to do in order to preserve liberty. And that pattern was supposed to perpetuate farther than the ranch. But this pattern was a pattern that needed to be followed in order for us to preserve our liberties in this country. And I'm sorry that I'm getting emotional. But I didn't know what that pattern was. It was just that He was going to show us that pattern. And so what happened through the week was pretty amazing, because at first we're standing there, just our family, not really knowing what to do, and watching them destroy our 140-year-old ranch and everything my dad's built his entire life. And then we started filming, we started showing the abuse that was going on, and all of a sudden people started showing up from all over. I mean, there was a man that came from New Hampshire. He said, I've driven 44 hours here to get here. What do you want me to do? I felt like I was supposed to come. And that was happening all over. We had people from Hawaii fly in, drive in from Alaska, all over, every state in the Union. They came. And they surrounded my little family. And they basically said, look, federal government, you're just not going to do this. You're not going to do this. And so you have a choice. You either answer to the American people or you leave immediately. And what did they decide to do? They left. They left. I watched the 107 vehicles with multiple people in most of those vehicles. 107 federal vehicles. I watched them leave within an hour of the people giving them those terms. One after another, they left. And then the people went up into where they were holding a bunch of cattle. They had about 400 head. Went up in there with horses and men, and they got those cattle and they put them back on the range. And those cattle have been on the range ever since. And so that was the pattern. The pattern was one person who had rights that were granted to or given to him from God. He said, no, these are mine. You're not going to take them. These are mine. They belong to me and nobody else. And then he was willing to stand and risk whatever it took. And in fact, that was his term. I'll do whatever it takes. And then when it came to the point where his life and the life of his family was about ready to be destroyed, while his rights were being taken away, the American people come and surrounded him and defended him and corrected the problem. And that was the pattern. That was what I saw. And that was the pattern, and I understood it. I didn't know it at that time, but after it was all done and I was able to contemplate, I understood very clearly that that was the pattern. And that's what we are going to have to do in Idaho. We are going to have to do that. And that's what each of our communities need to do now. We need to keep doing that. And that's what will preserve liberty. I also learned that rights are not maintained in the courts or in the ballot box. We've been led to, kind of duped into believing that that's how rights are maintained, and they're not maintained that way. They're maintained by claiming, using, and defending them. And then calling upon our neighbors and on our friends and our family and those who are righteous around us to help defend. When in history have you ever seen where, there's violations of rights, going on, and you know what? Let's go to the ballot box and we'll fix this. It's never happened in history. Or we'll go to the courts and we're going to fix this. That's not the way rights have been preserved. They've been preserved by coming together, uniting with each other, and defending those rights. That's how they are. And that is the role of the state. That is what the state is. And I feel like if we have an opportunity, the political climate is right. I'm being open and with everybody that I speak to, that my purpose of going into the governor's seat of Idaho is to direct the resources and the agencies of Idaho to the defense of the people's rights for the purpose in which it was established. How is that done? Yeah, we're going to have to downsize and strip some of these oppressive powers. We're going to have to get them back in the legislature's hands. We're going to have to get them back in the people's hands. We're going to have to stop this flow of federal money that's coming into our school districts, our county offices, our county sheriffs, our state, even in the businesses, our private businesses. We have to stop this flow. Our founders said that if we would allow that to happen, it would put the states and the people into undue obedience. That's what's happening right now. And so, I think I've answered your question. I'm not sure if I've answered it or not, but
I think you have, in the fact that we need to stand up as a people.
Yeah.
And just count on you, basically.
no, and again,
We need to help you,
yeah,
so.
Occupied.
yeah, and the state, if we can get the state of Idaho to start the resources of the state and the people to start functioning in that purpose, then when a Biden administration comes down upon the people, well, guess what? It's not this little family or a couple people trying to fight this massive power. It's now the state saying, oh, look, you're not going to do that. You're not going to do that. And you're just not going to. And all of a sudden now, guess what? Now the federal government cares. Because look, you got the state saying no. And the people behind a governor that are with him and saying no. That becomes something where we might be able to get through this without conflict. Right? And so it is an effort of peace. It's an effort of peace to go get in the seat of government, to get it under control. And I'm willing to do that. I'm willing to fight as I've been fighting. I'm willing to sacrifice almost everything, not everything, but almost everything. And to be able to get the state to fulfill its purpose so that we can live peacefully here, worship how we want to, travel, trade, and do the things in which God has given us to do in this beautiful, beautiful land. I mean, beautiful land. So that's my answer.
Idaho's election process, is ours corrupt as everybody else, or I felt pretty good here in Franklin County. Ours, at least my experience, because I do absentee ballot, I just go in the office, do it, paper, and take it, so.
Well, I talked to the Secretary of State, says everything's okay.
They didn't run my ballot through a Dominion voting machine.
So, we don't use Dominion. Every county is a little different, but most counties do a paper ballot, and then they have a counting machine. It is counts it electronically. We are working as our campaign to have our volunteer army to poll watch. We're going to create an app where people can report things live right as it's happening. That'll go to us. So like imagine election night, we get these reports coming in. We were able to, through an attorney and through another representation, go directly to the Secretary of State. Look, this has to be stopped right now, like right now. And then also we have the ability, because I have been in software and I've built multiple softwares. Didn't tell you, but since then I've built 2 more softwares since the fleet maintenance one. One of them is for our campaign. And so I have the ability, not myself, but I have the manpower to read code, to certify machines, to do those things. And so we plan on implementing those checks and watches to try to make sure that the integrity of the Idaho election is in place. And if anything, to say, look, well, the Ammon Bundy campaign, they got a really close eye on things. Maybe we should, if there is election fraud going on, we would hopefully to be able to deter that a little bit. But it is very difficult, because as soon as you go into electronics, it can be manipulated pretty easy. And I don't really like the process. Most counties are, you put in, you paper ballot, you put it in the machine counts it, puts it on a USB jump drive. It goes to the county recorder's computer, and he or she puts it in there, uploads it, and ends up reporting it, and then sending the report to the state. Which you can see there's could be a lot of problems there. I wish they would just count the paper ballots and give them certify it by multiple people watching, and then give them the report. But that most counties do it that way, from what I understand. So, right.
I have a question in regards to the taxes. You talked about the property taxes and stuff. The last couple of years, I've really realized how pathetic my education was in regards to the government, and not understanding how anything worked. And I really thought that taxes were part of like the way our society was supposed to work. So I've been taught taxes are, that's how you keep your roads going, and that's how you pay everybody, the police officers, everybody to do stuff. But property taxes especially, now that I'm a homeowner, I'm sitting there going, okay, well, even when I pay off the loan, if I still have to pay these taxes and I don't pay the tax and they can come and take my house, how do I really own that house?
Exactly.
And so that's one where I'm going, I'm not okay with that. But then there's that other side of me that's going, well, then if you're not paying taxes, how does all this other stuff work? So that's kind of my question is, when you take away the taxes, like how do these other things continue to operate?
That's a great question. So I am proposing the elimination of property tax, and for the very reason why you said. That very reason is because you don't own your home when you have to keep paying on it. And there's some great examples of it in the 30s. During the Depression, more people lost their home because they couldn't pay the taxes than they did because they couldn't pay the mortgage. People in Idaho every day lose their home. In fact, we just heard a story when we were in, I forgot where we were at when we heard that story. Wendy, do you remember? Anyway, we've been all over. So I just heard a story of a guy that said that he has this elderly friend, and all of a sudden he gets a new address saying she's moved, and he asks her why. She says she couldn't pay the taxes. She lost her home. And that happens every day in Idaho. Mostly to the elderly. It also happens to those that lose their job for a long period of time or are disabled. Basically, if you can't pay the state, you don't get to keep your home. That idea, that theory, or that, whatever you want to call it, is a Marxist, communist theory. It is, and I'm not saying that to excite. It is actually one of the pillars of the Communist Manifesto, and is the elimination of private property. In fact, Karl Marx, one of his famous quotes, says that communism can be summed up into one sentence: the abolition of private property. And private property is a communist idea that we've got thinking that, oh, this would be a great way to fund government. So I'm going to eliminate it. Now, what do we do for legitimate government expenses? And I do say legitimate, right?
Right.
How do we pay for that? Well, I'm proposing that we replace property tax with a consumption tax. Consumption tax is the only moral way to tax people. And so it would look like this. Let's say we have the average home. Anybody have an idea what the average home is costing right now, or the price of an average home in Idaho? It's $403,000. that number is a couple months old, but I think it's probably pretty close. $403,000, up 73% in the last 5 years. So, and guess what? Property taxes followed with it, right? And so, let's take a $400,000 home because it's easy math, and an average person, depending on the county, pays $2,000 to $3,000 a month, or excuse me, a year, in property tax on a $400,000 home. That equivalates to $60,000 to $90,000 in a 30-year period of time, which is, you know, typically the average period of a mortgage. So you're looking at revenue for each homeowner, average home, of $60,000 to $90,000 to the county and to the state that homeowner pays in a 30-year period of time. So now we need to work on, well, how do we get close to that? Obviously we want to downsize the size of government, the expense of government, so, you know, but how do we get comparably to that? Using consumption tax. What's the benefit of?
You don't have to replace it, you can.
What's that?
You don't have to replace the.
I understand, and I'm not,
Yeah.
that's the goal, right?
Yeah.
But I'm gonna right now try to convince you that replacing property tax with a consumption tax will more than pay for the state's needs, okay? County and state's needs. So, let me finish here. Hold that, well, go ahead.
Well, what's the
You might-
difference between a consumption tax and a VAT tax, a
Okay.
value-added tax like Canada?
A value-added tax?
Yeah, that's essentially the same thing, isn't it?
Well, so a consumption tax is like basically a sales tax.
Yeah, so
Okay,
you're
but it would,
paying-
or a transfer tax, they could call it that way. So when you purchase a home, let's say a $400,000 home, and let's say the consumption tax was 5%. Okay, that's $20,000, right? That would be the tax that would be due at the time of the purchase of the home. Now that could be rolled into a mortgage, so that you could pay it off for the 30 years. And it works out to where it'd be no more than what we're paying a month on our property tax. But the difference is what? When you're done paying the mortgage, you own your home, right? Now you might be saying, well, 20,000 is a far cry from 60 to 90,000, right? Well, you have to calculate that the average home in Idaho sells 3 to 5 times in a 30-year period. So that would equivalent $60,000 to $120,000 revenue to the state if it was at 5%, and it would pay for the legitimate purposes of government. But what is the difference? When you pay off your mortgage, you own it. You no longer pay taxes on it. And now if you sold the home, then the person who buys it, that tax is due, becomes that 5% or 4% or 3%, whatever is decided, that becomes due. It becomes part of the mortgage. It can be rolled in and it happens again, or if you want to just pay it flat out, not roll it in the mortgage, you could do that too if you had the money. So, yes.
So it would be real estate only consumption tax?
It'd be the
Right-
same, it
right
would
now,
be
we don't
replaced.
have- There's no sales tax on real estate, am I?
Correct. Well, there's no sales tax. I'm proposing that we replace property tax with that, right? And what for? What am I proposing? Why would we do that?
I don't know, I'm saying.
So when you pay off the mortgage, you own your home, right? You don't have to keep paying it.
You don't
And
lose it if you can't
we're
pay.
trying to fund the legitimate purposes of government. Now, the only negative, because I got you thinking, so you're probably gonna think about this, the only negative is the interest you pay on the $20,000 over the 30-year period. But when you balance that against owning your own home and not having to pay taxes after you paid off the mortgage or paid the taxes off, then to me, and I think to most Idahoans, it's well worth it. And so, yes?
You could get really creative with that $20,000 and how you pay it off. You don't necessarily have to amortize it all the way through your loan. And I see, and if that actually happens, if
You just
Yeah.
do like a regular tax, just separate from your mortgage, like you collected a payment.
Yeah, you could do that. The thing is, when you do the math, it's about the same monthly. So it's very close to what we're already paying. And where homes are constantly sold, it makes up for the, go ahead.
We wouldn't have to have a county recorder's auditing to happen over and over and changes everybody.
No, I mean, again,
So there's a savings there.
that's right. There's a tremendous amount of benefit by doing it this way, because because you understand that the way I see it right now, and there are different ways and creative ways to do this, but the way I see it now is when the home is sold and the title is transferred and it's signed, well, that tax would be part of the mortgage. This would be normally, right? Well, that $20,000 would go to the state, and the state's out of it. The state's out of it.
And the county.
The state and the county are out of it.
Yeah, you're right.
They received it, they're out of it. Now, you just pay the mortgage.
Yeah.
And as soon as you pay it off, you own your home. And the county will be receiving the money in more bigger sums, so they're gonna have to, manage it. But it also can be a great advantage for a county, because then they can use it. They don't have to get bonds and several things to do development. So if there was an area where people were coming in and buying homes or buying lots or whatever homes, well, yeah, there's your money to do the infrastructure for the roads and for the underground and all of that. And they don't have to go borrow money and pay interest on that money. They can just fund it themselves and develop it, right? And so it's better for the county. The only negative thing is if the county doesn't use it responsibly, and then all of a sudden now they need a bunch of money, which could happen, right? That's a reality. Anyway, so that's my proposal. And when it comes to income tax, I'm proposing to eliminate income tax. 9 states have already eliminated income tax, and income tax in Idaho has just become more of a slush fund. Just something that more income that they come in, and they've just built government and made bigger government and created a great big jobs program over there in Boise. And to be honest with you, we just don't need the income tax.
Where does that revenue come from?
Sales tax.
You don't need it.
No, we don't need it. I'm actually, in this case, I'm saying we don't need the extra income tax funds coming into the state. We're gonna have sales tax.
Okay.
We're gonna have sales tax.
Real estate.
Which is a
sales.
consumption, well, we already have sales tax on everything else,
Right.
which is a consumption tax. We might talk about eliminating grocery tax, right? But between the consumption tax or transfer tax on property and the sales tax on the other goods, the state has more than enough funds to be able to fund its legitimate purposes, including the county.
Constitutionally, income tax is illegal and property tax.
Absolutely.
So, do away with it.
Yep.
One more question about that. Is that something, you see a lot in government right now, it's like one person steps in and they're like, oh, I'm gonna do this, and then the next person comes in and they just take it away. And so it's like, is that something that can just kind of flip-flop back and forth depending on who's in the seat?
No, in order to make the property tax thing work and stick and all of that, it'll have to be legislated. And, the legislature will, in fact, so the way it would work is, as governor, I would propose this bill. I would flush it out, I'd do all the background, and then I would propose it as a bill, and the House or the Senate would bring it in, and ultimately I'd have the say of whether I pass it or not, because I could veto it. So if they changed it to the point where it wasn't beneficial to the people anymore, So I would use my influence as the governor to make this a statutory code in Idaho. And it would replace the property tax codes. And we would also make sure that the counties had to work within a certain parameter, and make it bulletproof so that basically it becomes a true consumption tax and truly replaces property tax. So it would be, and then it wouldn't be easy for someone to just replace it. Now they could, but it wouldn't become an easy thing. So, yeah. So that's a great question.
What do you think could or should be done or can be done to deal with our fiat currency and to deal with the mess that we have because of it?
Oh, that's a good question. So I believe that it's like, how much time do we have here tonight?
Should we abolish the Federal Reserve?
Well, let's turn off the cameras. So I'm going to answer within the power of a governor. Okay? And that is to stop the flow of federal funds coming into the state. Okay? To do everything we can to stop the flow of the federal government's funds coming into the state. And that way we become more independent. And I'm not talking about not trading with US dollars. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the state, the federal government coming in and saying, hey, we'll give you 6% to the school districts. We'll give you 6% of your budget if you agree to this curriculum. Right?
That's why we don't have control over your school system.
That's right. Or the health districts, or the state, or your county, or your mayor, or your city, all of these. That's exactly what's happening. They'll say, hey, if you'll agree to the UN building codes, if you'll agree to this, we'll give you $1.5 million to some little city. Thank you for coming. And so stopping that flow is a huge thing.
On that subject, what's the biggest reason, if you were elected governor and swore an oath to the Constitution, that you wouldn't accept any federal funds?
Are you saying, would I take that oath?
Yeah, when you take that oath, what's the biggest reason that you wouldn't accept federal funds?
Well, because of it never comes without strings. It always comes with a contract. The federal government never gives a dollar without receiving obedience for it, or what they call memorandums of understanding typically. It's a contract.
Could I suggest another reason?
Sure.
If you swear an oath to the Constitution doesn't authorize the federal government to do any of that.
So that's the
So
avenue.
then you would be upholding your oath to the Constitution if you refuse to take federal government money, because there's nowhere in Article 1, Section 8 that it says they can do that, right?
Yeah, and it also, so he's talking about basically the legal path of stopping this flow. So for example, if we said, look, we're going to nullify the contracts, the memorandums of understanding, we're going to nullify them in the state of Idaho. But the problem is we've received the money, so it's like violating a contract. But the contract was void and null and void in the beginning because they did not have authority to be contracting with a school district. What is Washington, D.C., agents in Washington, D.C., contracting with a school district in Littletown, Idaho?
And you're binding people who are not even part of it.
Yeah, so, I mean, you're exactly right, and that would be the basically remedy, or at least the constitutional stand, to nullify these contracts and then to stop them from coming in. Now it'll be a battle because people love money and they're addicted to federal money, right? I mean, I'm talking about this little town right now is addicted to federal money. The school is addicted. The county is addicted. They're all addicted to federal money. So now you're going to come along and say, look, no longer you can have that cocaine. You can't have that cocaine anymore, right? And how is an addict going to act? right? So it's gonna be a battle, but think about things like this. A school district comes along, they get 93, 94% of their budget from the state, and then they get 6 or 7% from the federal government. Well, as an executive of Idaho, you go, look, make your choice, 96% or 6%, or 94% or 6%, right? Gotta get my math here. And then it becomes pretty real. Look, if you contract with the federal government, well, you better get your whole funds for them, because we're not gonna help you out. That's if we can't win the just flat out, it's unconstitutional battle, which we will fight. So there was and we have.
I was just gonna say, we would never need it if what you're proposing we do with these taxes, our growth would be enough to, we'd want for nothing.
That's right.
With business and population.
We'll add on their getting control of the federally controlled lands and resources.
Yes, please.
Add that, imagine what that would do to the state of Idaho.
No, I
And
actually
so-
have a question about that.
Okay, go ahead.
I didn't realize.
We liked your last question, so go ahead.
I didn't realize how much they had of the state, and then you look at the map and you're like, man, we own barely anything, you know, and, in a video I was watching on you were saying how, you know, in the cities, they're growing taller and taller because they can't grow out, but for me, I'm kind of like, I don't want to grow out into all of those lands, like, and just have it be just people everywhere, you know, it's like, I live in a town of less than 500 people, I like that, like, I don't want tons of people coming in, so, I'm wondering, you know, if, first off, how do you take back the land that they have taken, you know, like, how does that exactly work? And when you do that, like, how do you kind of stop from just taking over and just having, you know, people everywhere, and how would that all work?
Okay, so we're talking about, anybody want to guess how many acres we're talking about in Idaho that's federally controlled? 32 million acres, 32 million acres plus, actually. So we're talking about a huge federal park, right? And remember, this environmentalist idea is basically to stop man from using the land and the resources. That is certainly happening. And what it is causing it's causing three things that are detrimental to Idaho. It's causing, first, affordable housing crisis, because we don't have enough supply, and our housing is if you don't have enough supply, what happens to the demand, right? And so our housing is too expensive. I mean, you can't even afford a home. A new couple, they just left right here. Well, maybe they were a new couple. Were they a new couple? Well, when I mentioned the average home price, they looked at each other and just kind of shook their head. Right? I don't know where their situation is, but new couples are looking for homes and they can't afford it. You cannot afford a home in Idaho unless you bring money from out of state, or somehow you did something to really get rich here in Idaho, which does happen, but it's rare. So that's problem number one. Problem number two is that the land that we are building on is what? It's agricultural land, right? We're building on our fields and our farms. The number one industry in Idaho is what? Agriculture. It's agriculture. We're destroying our economy. You know, it might seem slow, but there's a figure, I need to get it in front of me, because it's almost 300,000 acres since, I don't know, the 90s to 2018, and we don't have the figures after that. That's a lot of land. Imagine has been going on since 2018 until now. We've seen a tremendous amount of growth. So we're destroying our number one industry in Idaho by building on. It's pretty hard to grow a crop when you have a house in the middle of it, or a whole bunch of houses. So, and then three, our cities, especially Boise and the metropolitan area there, is growing up because they can't grow out. even though they're completely surrounded by land that would be be beautiful housing development, just the rolling hills, and you could build roads and houses all over up in there. But they won't allow houses to be built, so they're building them on the farms, and most of the farms are gone now in the metropolitan area. So now they're building up. Well, history proves, statistic proves, everything proves. Go look at Oregon and Washington, California, Nevada, Colorado, New Mexico, and so on and so forth, proves that when they build up, and get dense populated cities, they get they lose their conservative identity. They lose their their connection to the earth, to the land, and they don't understand where their food comes from anymore. They think it comes from Albertsons. And then they start voting different. And now they're so densely populated, you have a huge population controlling the rest of the state. And that's what's going to happen. That is what's happening.
What you're talking about is Agenda 30. You're familiar, are you familiar with that?
I am.
What can you do as a governor to stop the influence of socialist NGOs in our county?
Take back the land and resources. Take back the land and resources and get them into the people's hands. Now, your question and concern was, well, what about these other lands that we enjoy and so forth? We're talking about 32 million acres. There are what we call and would designate as multiple use lands. This would be more of your mountains, forest areas, and so forth that we enjoy so much, and we hunt, hike, fish, and so forth. Those would be preserved as multiple use. When I say multiple use, I'm talking about ranchers ranching, logging, mining, but also hunting, hiking, fishing, the way that it was always established. Those rights would be preserved. And then these lands around these cities and these towns would become available for disposal, and they would become available for people to be able to start building or also developing more farms if there's land for that. But most of our farmland was identified 150, 200 years ago, and it was developed for that purpose. And so that's my answer. Now, you did ask a question, well, how are you going to do it?
Yeah.
So, I won't take too much more of your time. Thank you for your patience. But I'm going to explain to you, and then maybe we can wrap things up. So when you look on a map, and just so you know, the fight about federal government taking over land and what constitutionally is the federal government's authority and all of that, that's been what my family has fought for generations. And so when I say these things, I hope to say them with credibility and authority. When you look at a map, and you look at a map of Idaho, and you'll see a green area, and that's all private property, right? And then right on the border of it, then that's federally controlled land. You notice I don't say federal land. I don't say BLM, Forest Service land. We have to stop saying that. You'll go right on there, and then that's federally controlled land. Well, why is the green private property, it doesn't really matter the color. Why is this private property and over here is federally controlled land? Anybody know?
Probably got homesteaded because
Yeah.
of the water.
Someone claimed it.
Yeah.
They just came in and claimed it. Okay?
But if they didn't have water, they couldn't make a viable go and make the claims.
That's right, but you'll see little spots of private property somewhere because there's either a spring or something, and they made a little homestead out of it. It could be right in the middle of this federally controlled land. You're like, well, hey, how did that end up being private property? Because someone claimed it. And then it wasn't until the 50s, 60s, 70s, the federal government saw all this unclaimed land in the West because it was so arid. Why are states like Kansas all private property?
Because they had water.
Because they had water and they
Farm,
claimed
yeah.
it. They claimed it. And they left no land for someone to claim later. It all became private property because they claimed it. So what happened in the 60s, really, 60s and 70s, the federal government, I'm talking about 1960s and 70s, I'm not talking 1960s and 70s, right around that time, shortly after the World War II, and it kind of got settled. The federal government came in and looking all the west and said, look, all this unclaimed land, what's called unappropriated land. And they began to, well, we're going to put they sent their surveyors out to map it. They started putting their signs on it, and they began to claim it. But what happens if you go, okay, look, here's some federally controlled land. Okay, you identify I can't think of what the name is. Yeah, anyway, and you go down to the county recorder's office and you say, hey, can you show me the title on this? What is the recorder going to tell you? What is the county recorder going to tell you?
No title.
There is no title. It's unappropriated land. It's unappropriated. And what does the state and the counties have power to do? Appropriate land. We're going to use that tool and we're going to appropriate the land. We're going to take it back, and that's what we're going to do. We're going to use that mechanism, and we're going to appropriate that land, and it's just that simple. And yeah, is the federal government going to cry, and are they going to try to legally fight? Are they going to try? Yes, absolutely. But guess what? It's the state fighting it, not some little family. It's the state fighting that battle like it should have been from the beginning. And it's the state saying this, federal government, you had no business in claiming this land in the first place. You have no constitutional authority. In fact, the constitutional authority you do have says you shall dispose of it. And you did dispose of it when you made us a state. And that's the argument, the legal argument that will be made, and it'll be the state making it, not families. And that way we can get back our land and resources and get back to using it like we need to be using it. We can preserve our multiple use lands, and what it would do for the economy in Idaho is just, unbelievable what it would do for it. So right here, and then right here.
The 37 states joined the Union after the original 13 were to come in on the same footing as the original 13. They don't have federal land, except that they ceded to them. So the feds didn't honor the Constitution.
That's right. It's not just for the 37. It's a constitutional protected right under Article 4 for a state to enter the Union on equal footing.
Right.
And we're not entered the Union on equal footing. 63% of our land is controlled by the federal government. And they did it after the fact. They broke the contract, became predatory to the people in the states, and we weren't aware enough to stop it. And that's just what has happened. That simple.
Just a comment to go along with what was mentioned earlier about the mentality in the more urbanized areas. So I moved up here to get away from Utah from that mentality, because Utah has been destroyed now for all intents and purposes. And it's just ironic that I got a notification. I've been talking to a couple people today. There was an article put out in Salt Lake Tribune that says we need to modernize and urbanize all of rural Utah. And to which I replied, and I says, well, so that needs to be left alone. Where's the food going to come from? One guy says, so you don't believe in urban modernization? We don't need farming anymore. And then she says it'd be nice if they'd actually grow food, but they're growing alfalfa. To which I replied, well, alfalfa feeds cattle, which then feeds. It's just that disconnect of mentality.
Yeah, that's what happens when you get so densely populated. And taking back our lands will allow our cities to spread out and still stay connected. It'll drop the cost of housing, and it'll keep us from primarily building on our agricultural land. And then the other thing is and then it tremendously increase our economy because of the access to the land and resources. And people don't know this or realize this, but the state of Idaho is technically a welfare state because we receive more federal money than we send, right? Why? One is, anyway, but technically it's supposed to be that, we don't have access to our lands, and therefore we can't collect property tax on those lands and all of that. and it actually puts the state at an extreme economic disadvantage. So taking back our lands is the solution to all that. And if we don't, imagine what is going to happen. Our cities will become more dense. They will become what we call a Hunger Games, what I call a Hunger Games syndrome. We have the capital city, you know, and you got all the districts feeding them. The capital city is just a cesspool of welfare and weird people dressing in and putting makeup all themselves and playing games. And that's what happens, right? And we can't let that happen. We can't let our number one economy be destroyed because we're looking for housing. We can't continue to have housing so high priced that the only people that can afford it is people from out of state. How does that make sense, right? And all of it is resolved by getting back our land that's constitutionally ours to use and to benefit from. So that's it, right here. Yeah, you
On
had a
that
question.
subject, if you're governor, you're gonna have to deal with money for public schools. I'm not a proponent of public schools, but you still have to deal with that. The question is, how much money do you get from federally controlled lands versus property owned by individuals or corporations or businesses or whatever? Do you know the difference there?
Like right now?
Yeah.
Well,
Because you said all those millions of acres that are federally controlled. It's my guess that you're getting just a small amount of money
That's correct.
from the federal government for those compared to if they were privately owned.
Yeah, that's right.
property.
Yeah, it's called PILT, payment in lieu of taxes, and it's like very, very small compared to what, you know, a property tax, which I'm planning on eliminating property tax, but there still would be all this transferring of property, which would be, I mean, we literally would have to get to where the state, it would be probably down to like 1% transfer tax. We just wouldn't need the money it would be generating. The state wouldn't need the money it would be generating. It would have so much funds because it's like saying, I got you back here. It's like saying, I've got $1 million in the bank, but I can only spend or use, 37% of it. Well, imagine if you can use the other 63%. I mean, imagine what you could do with it. Then that's exactly what's, you know, a pretty good comparison of what's going on here in Idaho. We can't use 63% of the wealth, and it's actually 72% of the subsurface mineral rights. So, anyway, you talked about education, but I don't know if I have enough time to answer your direct question on that, but at least with taxes right here.
Just thinking maybe we should send the federal government a bill for property tax.
Well, that all happened you know, when the states like kind of the late 80s, early 90s, that was happening to states like, that's where PILT come from. Because they were like, well, wait a minute, you're controlling all our land and we can't even pay our own bills. You know, otherwise this land would be sold for private property and the state would be able to generate, you know, property tax off of it. This is putting us at an extreme disadvantage. That was the argument. And so the federal government says, oh, we'll give you a little bit back and we'll call it PILT, payment in lieu of taxes. That's what it's called. That is what it is, payment in lieu of taxes. We're gonna pay you a little bit because you can't tax on it. And so that's it. Education is another thing I'd love to cover, but I think we need to wrap things up. I just want to encourage you kind of to go full circle. Don't forget how much power you actually could have in this little corner of the state. There's 66,000 conservative, if you will. You know, I know we're talking about unaffiliated voters, but 66,000 voters, excluding the Democrats, in this little area. And the governor in the primaries, which is really what determines who's going to be governor, Governor Little received 73,000 votes to be the governor. So it's time to get out. Let's get your friends, get them involved. We're going to come back here. when we come back here, let's fill this room as packed as we can pack it. And let's have these conversations. Let's get this corner of the state more active. And we can all do better. We'll do better. We're working on a pretty awesome system where we'll be able to communicate with those 66,000 people. It comes with a cost though, so we need you to donate. We're asking people to donate $20 a month or more for the next 12 months. And if we can get, that's what we're asking. And I'm not taking a dime from the Republican Party. The Republican Party hates me. They do. They hate me. They vowed never not to give me anything. And now I see that those same people uniting with the Democrats in order to try to destroy us. And so we need you to be active. We need you to donate. We need you to talk to your friends. We're going to come back here. And it'll probably in a couple months we'll come back here. And we'll let you know when we do that, and you let your friends know, and we get and fill this room up, and we'll fill it up multiple times if we have to, and make that impact. So thank you for your time.
So if each of us brought 2 people, the room will be full. So we don't have to do that much to fill the room, but I'm going to do that next time. I'd like to thank those who came early and helped set up. There's a little bit of cleanup we have to do, so anybody that can stop and first stay and put up chairs, that'd be great. Dwayne Weeks was going to give us a closing prayer, and then we'll call it night.
Our Father in heaven, we thank thee, Father, for the information that we received tonight. We ask thee also that thou will please give us the knowledge and the wisdom and the discernment to think about these things and understand them, to pass them along to others, Father, that don't understand them as well and that need to understand them more. We ask thee that thou please watch over us as we travel and go about safely. And please bless the Bundys also as they travel and go about on these campaign trips, that we might pass the word along more and influence others to do the same. We say these things, Father, and thank thee for this great country and the opportunities that we have. And we pray that thou please help us to keep them that way. And we say this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.